The war in Ukraine is escalating on day 1,000 of the conflict. Today, Ukraine fired its first long-range missiles into Russia after receiving U.S. approval, and President Volodymyr Zelensky signaled it will continue to use all of those capabilities. Russia's president also signed a change to the country's nuclear doctrine today, implicating nuclear powers that support attacks on Russian soil. Meanwhile, in Brazil, today's G20 leader statement was the weakest one yet on the war. It doesn't mention Russia, and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau wasn't pleased.
No, it's not strong enough for me. We have been unequivocal that Russia is responsible for not just the illegal invasion of Ukraine, but the knock-on consequences on food insecurity around the world, on rising energy prices, on disrupted supply chains, on uncertainty and insecurity for people around the world that are worried now that the rules-based order no longer holds.
So, as the war drags on, is there enough international support to sustain Ukraine? William Taylor is a former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine. He's also the vice president for Europe and Russia at the U.S. Institute of Peace, a nonpartisan group funded by Congress. Thank you for making time for the program, sir. I heard a journalist in Ukraine earlier today saying that, in his view, his country is actively losing this war. 1,000 days in, would you agree with that assessment?
No, it doesn't have to. Ukraine does not have to lose this war, Catherine.
But at this moment, they are actively losing it.
Actively losing it is too strong. The Ukrainians are going to continue to fight no matter what. The Russians are having their own set of difficulties. It is true. What he says is certainly, if what he means is that the Russians are gradually taking territory from Ukraine, that's true. And if he means that the Russians are gradually taking back some of the territory that the Ukrainians took of Russia, that's also true. But I would not characterize it as losing the war.
Okay, let's talk about this latest move, the U.S. approval to shoot these ATACMS, the long-range missiles, into Russia. A lot of folks saying this came too late. What difference can they make at this point?
Well, they can make a difference. I mean, it goes back to your first question. They can help the Ukrainians disrupt the Russian attacks. They can help the Ukrainians disrupt the North Korean attacks. They can help the Ukrainians go deep into Russia at ammo depots and oil depots and ammunition dumps. And military targets that are important for the Russian aggression. And the Ukrainians, using these new weapons, can go after them for the first time. But even more important than that, Catherine, I think, is that if the United States now has said you can use these, which we have, the United States has, then the French and the British, who have been holding back on giving that approval to use their long-range weapons, may go ahead and take that step. I think they probably have taken that step. And there's one more issue, which is the Germans. The Germans have an even longer range weapon, which they've not provided to the Ukrainians. But now that the Americans have, and hopefully the British and the French have, the Germans will be under pressure to go with it.
Oh, well, as you say, under pressure. Not clear yet that that is a move that they are willing to make, given the suggestion that this would be an escalation. And I do want to talk about Vladimir Putin in all of this, because, of course, he has now revised his nuclear doctrine. He signaled he was going to do it some time ago, but this came today, saying in part that if a nuclear power backs an attack, Russia will consider it an attack by that country. I mean, help us sort out what is saber-rattling from Putin here about nuclear capabilities versus, something to be quite genuinely alarmed by.
Catherine, you have reported, everyone has reported that he has made these threats over and over for the past 1,000 days. More than that, actually. He started even before he actually invaded. So he has said this or done this. What he's done today is sign a piece of paper. I don't think that makes it any more or less likely that he would use these nuclear weapons. I think it's very unlikely that he would use these nuclear weapons for all kinds of reasons that we can talk about. But signing a piece of paper has no real effect on his ability to make that decision. He's got other reasons to make that decision not to do it. I mean, first of all, they may not work. The nuclear weapons that he has, they've had a couple of tests recently, and they failed. The weapons haven't worked. He may be worried about that, but even more important than that, the political fallout that he would sustain, that he would trigger by firing a nuclear weapon at a nuclear unarmed nation right on its border, previously a fraternal Slavic brotherly nation, Ukraine. That would be a problem for him even in this Russia, but even more important than that would be the blowback and the criticism and he would be ostracized by the Chinese. The Chinese president has told the Russian president, don't even talk about this.
Well, and I suppose the other piece of all of this is that he may well be waiting, as so much of the world is, to see what President-elect Donald Trump is actually going to do in Ukraine. We know he says he'll end the war in a day. Tell me what questions come to mind when you've heard the pledges he is making. What are you trying to sort out at this point?
So no one really knows. There's been a lot of different discussions, both in this current administration and in the new administration as it forms. So we don't really have a good sense at all of what the plans will be. I think they'll be working on it. A lot will depend, Catherine, of course, on who all the people are. They've named a couple of the people in their cabinet and the national security system, but there are people below that have to be named as well. We'll get a lot of information on your question over the next week or two, I imagine.
Is there any question in your mind that if Donald Trump evacuates this space, whether the international community can fill it and adequately support Ukraine?
Well, the Europeans have been doing a very credible job of providing both weapons, not as many as the United States, but they've been doing a good job of providing those weapons, but even better job on the financing. The Europeans have stepped up in terms of providing the funds that allow the Ukrainian government to continue to pay their soldiers, to continue to pay their emergency care, their doctors. This is coming from the Europeans to the Ukrainians, and that's been a big. So yes, I imagine that they will continue to step up.
Canada's Prime Minister said the leaders' final statement from the G20 summit today was not strong enough on Ukraine. I wonder what you think that tells us. On 1,000 days, is international support perhaps dwindling?
You do have to worry about 1,000 days. The main thing you have to worry about 1,000 days is the Ukrainian soldiers that have been fighting for 1,000 days. And yeah, it's for Western nations and Western people to get tired. We have to recognize that the Ukrainians are fighting for us in some real sense, for our security, and they have been fighting for 1,000 days. But you're right. The G20 statement was not as strong as last year. I agree with the Prime Minister that it should have been stronger.
Can we even talk about, I wonder in closing 1,000 days out, what would it take for Ukraine to win this war? It seems like a question we've almost stopped asking as it grinds on. But is there an answer that comes to your mind, what it would take for Ukraine to win at this moment?
There is. And what it would take is for the Russian president, the Kremlin, to recognize that he cannot win in the way that he thought he could win. He can't win this war by taking over Ukraine. That's clear. To recognize that the damage he's done to his country has not been worth the gains that he's gotten. The 20% of Ukraine that he now occupies. When he realizes that, then he'll look for a way out, and then the Ukrainians will decide how to deal with that request.
Okay. Appreciate your time and your insights today, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Catherine.
William Taylor, former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine.